Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the Allgaier Gambit, which is a knight sacrifice in the King's Gambit. So you're already giving up a pawn, and then you decide to give up a knight for a very strong attack. So the King's Gambit starts out with e4, e5, and then f4. This is my favorite opening in chess. After the pawn takes, we play knight f3, stopping the queen coming down to h4. And then this variation, black plays pawn to g5, preparing to push forward and attack the knight on f3. We play h4, and they play g4. And then in this gambit, we're going to be playing knight g5. Now, not too long ago, I did make a video on the Kieślowski gambit, which is knight e5. These moves, while they may look similar, both of the knight moves are attacking the square on f7. They play very differently. So definitely recommend if you play knight to f3 and then you see your opponent's playing pawn g5, preparing to push forward, h4 pretty common. I recommend looking at both of these variations and then just see what you feel like you prefer. But in this video, we are going to be looking at knight to g5. And the main reason this is so different is once our opponent plays h6, we are forced to sacrifice our knight on f7. You can see there's no place for our knight to go. It can't come back to h3, f3 because of the pawns. Can't come up here to e6, obviously, and then h7 would die as well. So we're going to be sacrificing right away our knights on f7. After the king takes, we're then going to get our bishop involved to c4. Now, that's going to be most of the variations we are going to look at. We are also going to look at what happens if they don't play h6. Some of the common themes you could see, maybe knight to f6, or another thing I've seen is pawn to f3. This video is brought to you by Aim Chess. More from them later in the video. So the first variation we are going to look at is the main line, and that is h6 because it forces white to play knight takes on f7. And then after the king takes, we are going to play that bishop to c4. From here, black will usually just respond with king to e8. And you can start to see that none of black's pieces on the 8th rank have moved. They've heavily extended on the king side with the pawns on f4 and g4. So white has to be extremely aggressive to attack black. If black's able to hold off the attack, black's going to be better off. White sacrificed a knight, so both sides are equal in pawns, but white is down a minor piece. But in chess, it's all about the pieces involved in the attack. So even though black has more material, if white can somehow use the pieces involved in the attack better, they are going to be better off. But for sure, if black can play defensively correctly, they will have the upper hand. So white's going to try to get more and more material involved into the game, starting with queen to g4. Now, the three variations we are going to look at in this situation, the first one is knight f6, attacking the queen here. The next one is pawn d5. And then the last one is queen f6. So let's look at the first one, knight f6, attacking the queen on g4. This is not a great move from black. White's going to play queen g6, attacking the king here. King comes to e7. No, not a lot of great options you can start to see. And then e5. This is attacking the knights here. And the knight doesn't have a lot of good moves, but you can start to see all the threats that white has. They have queen taking on f6. That's pretty obvious. But they can also come to f6 with the check on the king, and that would also be checkmate. So black has a tough situation that they have to worry about. Okay, so let's look at some of the options. They could start with d5, but now we can just take that knight on f6. Maybe they play king to e8. We play bishop c5, and then when they play c6, we can take their rook on h8. Yes, they do take our bishop, but white's in a much better position in the game. Now, if we come back, what if they don't play d5? What if they play h7? Okay, we just looked at the queen takes on h8. So what if they say, yes, now I'm going to protect the queen coming to f7 with the rook, and it gets it out of harm's way if the queen ever tries to attack the h8 square. But the other threat that we have is the queen taking on f6. And so king to e8, then we can play queen g6 check, and then we're just going to capture that rook. This is not going to go well. It is going to end in a checkmate pretty soon here. Now, if we come back, what if the knight moves? Okay, so we already looked at we can attack the knight. So if it just comes to e4, well, then we can just play queen f7, and this is checkmate. Okay, so that's not going to work. So we've recognized that knight to f6, not really the strongest move. What if they try something else? What if they play pawn d5? Okay, well, now we can just play queen h5. And they can't play king d7, although it looks like it's getting out of harm's way. This would actually be a huge mistake, because then we could play queen d5. This is going to be a checkmate pretty soon. Bishop to d6 tries to hold on to it, but you can see there's no good spot for them to go. If they come to c6, it's going to be checkmate right away. If they come back, let's say king to e8, well, now we just have queen f7. This is going to be checkmate. So king to d7 in this spot is not going to work. The other option they could try is king e7, but you see it's pretty awkward. It blocks off the queen. It blocks off the dark square bishop. And we're still going to just come over to e5, checking the king and attacking the rook on h8. Now bishop to e6, sure, but now we could take with our pawn, attacking the bishop. The bishop is pinned down from this queen. So that gets pretty tricky. Queen d6, but now we can just take that rook on h8. Yeah, we could exchange in the center of the board here, but then we castle, and we're threatening the pawn on f7, or excuse me, on f4. We're also threatening this pawn on h6, depending on what they do with their knight. We're threatening that. They have to defend it with their queen. We can always play knight c3 with tempo, attacking the queen. And then we can start to push forward with our d pawn. We're the only piece, or we're the only side with a central pawn, attacking now with our bishop on f4. So we have a lot of threats. Should be a pretty easy game for white. Now, if we come back, we looked at what happens if they play knight f6. We also look what happens if they play pawn d5. But really the best move, because both of those are bad, is for black to play queen f6. If they haven't played this as black, I think it's tricky to find queen to f6 as the best move, but this is definitely what they should play. Before we go over this variation, a quick word from Aim Chess. One of the best ways to improve at chess is using Aim Chess. Their software has some features I think you're absolutely going to love. Let's say you're watching this video and you just want to do some basic analysis to see if white's winning or losing in a position. You can come through the King's Gambit, and if you're watching this video, you may say, okay, but what happens after knight to g5? Is white winning or losing? And you can see that if the engine's on, but not only that, you can look in other videos and see where this exact position has ever showed up. And you can do this for any opening. So you can see in this position at 4:35 in this video, this exact situation comes up. And it has it for multiple openings. Let's come down here to one I did on the Muzio Gambit. You can click on this, and it's not just my videos, but you can see it shows that exact position. So pretty cool feature if you're studying different openings and you want to see where a unique position has shown up. Maybe for your own games, you want to see how you perform. One of the great things about Aim Chess is when you first sign up, you link up your chess.com account, your Chess24 Lead Chess, and so it can start to do some really cool analysis on it. Maybe if you're looking at openings and you want to see how you perform in some of the popular openings. Are you getting ahead, or are you falling behind because maybe you're making some mistakes? You can see all the different openings you play and how you actually score coming out of those openings. Let's say you want to do some practice on your own games. Remember, this is all customized to you. You can click on the opening improver and it will say, hey, you've made this mistake 9 times in your own games. This is all unique to you, and so you can practice to make sure you don't make the same mistake again. Not only does it have opening tactics, but you can do just regular tactics or blunders that you've done in the past. It's all dedicated to focusing on your games and helping you improve. So if you want to check out Aim Chess, again, one of the best ways to improve, you definitely can. There's a link in the description below. Also, there's a code for 30% off. So I've partnered with Aim Chess. You can use that code to get 30% off. Definitely think you're going to enjoy it. But check that out and improve right away. Now, you may notice that the bishop and the queen are both eyeing down this knight on g8. And you can say, well, why is the queen on f6 that good if black's going to lose this material on g8? But it would be a huge mistake if white took on g8 because black has the subtle move h5. They definitely don't want to just take with their rook because then the queen can take on g8. Huge mistake. But they have h5, and this forces the queen off the g file. It can't stay anywhere here on this file because it would die. So let's say it comes back f3. Then all of a sudden black takes on g8. And the reason this is important, remember white gave up a knight early in the game so that they could have a strong attack. That light square bishop was a huge attacker for white. As soon as that comes off the board, white doesn't have a lot of threats immediately involved in the game right now. The bishop is blocked off. It's going to take a couple moves for that to get involved into the game. Yes, knight to c3, but that's not any more involved than knight to c6. And because white was already down that knight early on, it's going to be pretty easy for black to win this game. So definitely don't want to take on g8. Instead, we're going to be looking to play d4. This allows white to control the center of the board, get the dark square bishop involved into the game, preparing knight to c3 at some point if you want to. But white now has both pawns in the center, and it puts black to a test because how do they really defend from here? Usually in the King's Gambit, you see something like d6, but that would be a huge mistake because this light square diagonal is already controlled by the queen because white can just take on c8. So they can't play d6 right now. Really, the only option they're looking at is to play knight c6. Now we are going to push forward with e5. They'll probably come back to g7, one of the better moves. They could make a lot of mistakes here, as you can imagine. We're going to gobble up this material on f4. Remember, not trying to just trade down material. If we trade down material, that's better for black. As we get to the end game, if all the pieces are off the board, they are going to be up that minor piece. So you want to keep our heavy material involved into the game. And this is also a trap because if they tried to capture on g2 and say, hey, if you're going to take my pawn, I'm going to take your pawn as well, then this would be checkmate because we have queen to f7 and then king d8 and then queen takes f8, and this is going to be checkmate. So they can't take that pawn on g2. So more than likely now they could try something like d6. Okay, getting the light square bishop involved. We can't take with our queen right away. And even if our queen was on the light square, because the knight moved to c6, now the rook can defend that bishop. But white can get more pieces involved into the game. Remember, that is the entire game plan for white. So castle on the king's side. While our king's not that safe, that's okay. All we really want to do is have it slightly better, but also get our rook to this f file. Now we have our bishop, queen, and rook all eyeing down on the f file, which is extremely good. If they decide to take, that's fine, because now we can play knight c3, and this also allows them to make the mistake of taking with their knight, because if they take with their knight and we take with our queen, we have a pretty good setup here. We can get our bishop to f4. We're still threatening this f7 square, so if they do anything with their queen, we still have that threat. Also, we can come up and take on c7 at some point, depending on where their queen is. Always have to look out for their queen. But we just have a lot of threats. Once our bishop comes to f4, we can get our rook to the center of the board. So a lot of threats that black has to deal with. White's in a pretty good spot here, even though they gave up that minor piece earlier. And they do have an extra pawn over their opponent. Now coming back here, that was all based on if the queen comes to f6, which black definitely should. Black is ahead in this position. White has to be extremely aggressive. But even at the beginning, black doesn't have to play h6. Now I think it's the main line you'll see quite often, and so you're forced to take on f7. But if they don't play h6, you're not forced to take on f7. So a couple other options you could see. One is knight to f6. But then we're going to push forward e5, attacking the knight. They have a few ways they could respond. If they move their knight, which I think is a poor variation, let's say knight h5. We take on g4 with our queen, attacking their knight. They pretty much have to come back to g7. We're just going to keep gobbling up material here. So this is going to be pretty bad. If they try something else, maybe knight e5 or d5. None of those are really good. E5, it loses to our knight here. If they play d5, then we just play bishop c4, which is what we want to do the entire time. c6 to defend the knights. But then we can just play knight c6, attacking this knight here. We can always play queen g4. We're just getting more and more material involved into the game. We have a piece that's really annoying here on e5. We're putting a lot of pressure on the f7 square. And from Black's standpoint, they moved this knight all around the board, and it's not really protecting too much of the critical squares. So if they try to move their knight, that's not going to be good. Really the best option in this case, which I don't think they should be playing knight f6 anyway, but if we play e5, they should play queen e7, because now our pawn is pinned and we can't take the knights on f6. We can go ahead and just play d4, opening up for the dark square bishop to get involved into the game, solidifying the pawn chain in the center a little bit. Now Black could still force us. That h6 move attacking the knight, we are still going to take with our knights on f7. And so if they take with their king, that's fine. If they take with their queen, we're just going to take their knight because we're no longer pinned. So my guess is they're just going to take with their king, so we can't take their knight right here. But then we can play bishop to f4. We could, in this position, essentially look to castle on the queen side at some point. Play knight to c3, get our queen to g4, depending on where their knight is. Can't play it right away. But we do have some options. We can always castle on the king side and put that rook on the f1 file. So that's going to be pretty good as well. So we don't have to worry about the pit anymore. So white has some options here. Knight to c6. We could play bishop to c4, attacking the king. So it really depends on where our opponent's going. Their bishops are kind of locked out here. The rook on a8 is not doing too much. So while white did give up that knight on f7, you can see the king's in that awkward spot, and white can really attack for the rest of the game. Now that's what happens if they played knight to f6. The last version we are going to look at is f3. Because they're not attacking the knight, we don't have to move the knight right away. We are always looking to get more material involved into the game of the King's Gambit. So bishop c4, attacking the f7 square. And really the threat is, hey, if you want to come down and attack on g2, that's fine. You take on g2, we're just going to come up and take on f7, check. Probably going to come to e7. It's just such an awkward move for them. They can't take the bishop. It's protected by the knight. And so the king is blocking off the queen and the bishop. Now we're going to play g1. Don't want to allow them to take that rook and promote to a queen and check our king. Extremely bad. So that's really our only option, is to play rook g1. But then how do they respond? Well, really they need to play h6. But then we can play d4. Yes, they can take our knights, but it would be a pretty huge mistake, because if they take with their pawn, then we can play bishop takes on g5. And you can see this is attacking the king, and if they move that king, then we're going to take their queen on d8. So they can't really do that. So instead, knight to f6, really the only option here. And then we can just come back and play bishop d5, getting out of harm's way. We can now play e5, attacking that pin piece. The knight can't move. It's being attacked by the bishop, so that's now under attack. We can even play queen g4 right away, because remember, that knight can't move. So we have a lot of threats. Black is going to be in a very, very tough spot. So there are some cute ways that they could try to defend in this spot early on instead of playing h6. But if they don't play h6, I think black is in a pretty tough spot. So really what you're usually going to see is h6 and then f7. And then after the king takes, we're going to be playing bishop c4. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Remember to check out the link in the description below to learn more about aim chess and improve your game. If you have suggestions for other videos you want me to make, let me know in the comments below. But I will see you guys in the next video.